Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is another very special episode. We've got another writer interview. This time we are speaking with author Frank Martin. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
No, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Looking forward to this one. We've been talking about this book a little while. We initially were going to do something for part one, and then I said, let's wait until part two so we can talk about the arc of the story and sort of where things go from A to B. Glad that we were able to coordinate something to get this on the books for Polar Paradox, the part two, which is as of the release of this episode now going to be available on Kickstarter. We will have a link to that in the show notes. So before we get started about the book, Frank, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, some of the books you've written, sort of how you became a writer, et cetera, just a little bit on your background.
Yeah, I kind of been writing forever, kind of for as long as I can remember. I know in elementary school when the teachers, first grade assigns creative writing classes and everybody kind of gets together and they write their stories and they have a good time. And the teacher says, okay, now we're done. Let's move on to the next lesson. I kind of just never stopped that lesson. I just kept on writing stories through elementary school, middle school. When I got to high school, I decided I wanted to kind of push the fan fiction that I've been writing into more original, longer works. And this is prose at this point. So I've been writing novels steadily throughout college. And then at some point, I've been reading comics this whole time. And I took my love of storytelling and writing prose and said, let me just try writing a comic. And I quickly learned it's not that simple. There's a lot to learn. And I've been doing it for a couple of years now. And I got a couple books out. So here I am now, talking to you fine people.
Well, yeah, we've spoken to several writers, and I don't think any one of them will tell you it is ever easy. It's also never the kind of thing I think that you consider yourself ever master of, like you're constantly learning. It's that kind of field where you're always looking for something new. As soon as you finish a story, it's okay, what's the next story and how can I tell it better than the one that I told before?
Yeah, one of my favorite parts about writing is the challenge of crafting a story, something that you've never done before, stepping out of your comfort zone, writing a character that you've never done before, or a genre, or even a medium, anything that kind of pushes the envelope and makes me solve that puzzle of storytelling is what I love about it.
Now, you said you started off with fan fiction. What kind of stories, what universes were you dabbling in? Or was it original, or was it, I'm assuming since it was fan fiction, it was probably, pre-existing universes?
Everything that a testosterone-filled, prepubescent 12-year-old boy was into in the early 2000s. So I wrote stuff about Spider-Man and video games like Metal Gear Solid and Halo and Dragon Ball Z, all that kind of fun stuff. And I kind of dreamed of one day growing up and being able to write this stuff for a living. So, going into comics, hopefully writing my own stories, and then one day jumping on board something established, a property that I grew up loving would be kind of a dream.
Wow. All right. Very cool. So moving then to your current book, then Polar Paradox, where did the idea for this story come from?
So I met my co-creator in the book, Antonio, at a comic convention. He saw I was pushing some of my other books. I was an artist alley, and he was kind of just depending. And he said, "Oh, I'm a local artist," and we kind of hooked up and exchanged emails, and we were shooting ideas back and forth. And he said he wanted to do something in sci-fi, so I gave him a couple pitches. Polar Paradox specifically, the pitch came from I'm a religious reader of National Geographic. I read it every single month, cover to cover. I actually just finished June's issue today. And a couple years ago, they had a story that was essentially the first half of this premise for Polar Paradox. It was a bunch of scientists. They went diving off the coast of Antarctica in a place that nobody has ever dove in before. and they were taking pictures and describing the landscape, and it was alien and weird and bizarre. And then kind of my storytelling brain said, this is a perfect place for kind of a sci-fi adventure, a mystery. And I just basically took that story, that National Geographic story, and said, what happens if these scientists go missing? And then there you go. There's the plot of the polar paradox. And I pitched that to Antonio, and he ran with it. So we really hit it off with that idea.
All right. I mean, that definitely sounds like a fascinating premise, and it gives plenty of fertile ground for the unknown. And in that case, then it also leaves the opportunity, once you introduce the characters, by the nature of Antarctica, because it's not exactly a tourist trap, and you're not going to have that many people. You really can just hone in specifically on who you want to talk about. And I know Anthony has something specific to each of the characters, but yeah, I think just the fact that you set that up that way, it means that you don't get a lot of background noise.
It was a very cool place, and reading about it in the National Geographic story, I was able to lean heavily into the science, because National Geographic, the story is not a work of fiction, it's a journalistic story. So I was able to grab a lot of the aspects of the real life scientists that were doing this little National Geographic expedition and take a lot of the tidbits and throw them into the actual story. So even though it's sci-fi, especially part one leans more heavily into the science aspect rather than the fiction.
Yeah, I definitely, reading part one versus part two, got the sense that part one was, okay, this is some bad stuff that happens, but it's definitely within the realm of feasible things, aside from maybe some of the technology being, like maybe 15 minutes into the future kind of tropey, that the idea of the science and everything was very much grounded in reality. It's not until we get into part two that we really sort of shift into that other world, pun intended, so to speak. Some of the tropes that you use in terms of the geography and the idea, I'm really trying to avoid spoilers here, but some of those ideas in terms of the location are really centuries old. I mean, going back to H.G. Wells, the father of modern science fiction and things of that nature. What were some of the things that you used to put a new spin on those tropes?
That's a tough question, because the idea of tropes is that they're timeless, tried and true methods of various genre fiction that really hit off with audiences. I love big mysteries, mysteries that are too big for any one person to comprehend. And then as I'm pitching this book, especially part two, I like to say that the polar side of things is part one, and we get more heavily into the paradox with part two. And with paradox, this mystery that's kind of unfolding, or that the rescue divers find themselves in, along with the scientists, it's too much to kind of comprehend. So I had a good time kind of blowing it up and making it so big that it was just hard for them to wrap their brains around.
So we're introduced in part one to the rescue team. We'll talk primarily about the three divers, although two of them, without getting into too much spoilers, two of them have much more story time.
Screen time.
Much more. You spend a lot more time with two of these characters. Greg reminds me of Hudson from Aliens. What were some of your ideas as to the backstory of that character?
I'm kind of a witty jerk sometimes. I'm always looking for in conversations that opening to throw in a pun or to make some crude or snide remark. So
you're talking to the two perfect guys.
Yeah, this is all right. This just took a turn for the better.
So no, but I love that's kind of my personality a little bit. I'm always trying to make people laugh or kind of cut the tension with kind of a remark or a little comment. And I love putting myself into character shoes like that. And that's kind of who Greg is. He's the guy that sees an opening and seizes it to make an off-color remark. So I had a lot of fun with him writing his dialogue, because a lot of characters, they don't, or I should say people in general, don't really do that. They don't seize that opportunity to say something funny or witty. So I love inserting him into the scenes and being able to take that chance.
Yeah, that's a great point. The idea that you can take what is ultimately, when you think about the situation, it's going to be very heavy, very serious, both intellectually and Not to mention like the physical part, how grueling that must be for people doing that type of work. And then, all the things that they have to do in terms of their efforts, energy, all that. And you get a wisecracker. It has to happen at some point. And actually that type of thing can really help people, just liven up the mood a little bit. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but you'll never know if you don't take the chance.
Yeah, he was a lot of, he was definitely of the characters I introduced the most fun to play around with.
Well, I can absolutely understand that again from the dialogue and from the time that we spend with him. He's definitely comes across as the guy that you need him on the team, but you're not thrilled to have him there. I think that's a good way to describe him. So then I feel like he's supposed to be the leader, but I kind of feel like he gets usurped in that role by Helen. I don't know if that was intentional or maybe that's just my interpretation of it. And it's not necessarily an attack on you. Why you? I don't mean you, the writer. I mean you, the character. It's not an attack on you, the character. But I just feel like for whatever reason, the scenario that they find themselves in, particularly in the second half of the story, plays more to Helen's strengths. So it kind of starts off that you is in charge, but as time goes on, the leadership role kind of shifts. I don't know if that was something that you had planned, or again, maybe if that's just my interpretation of it.
Well, the third character is Linda. I don't know where you got Helen from.
Yes, I'm sorry. That's what I meant. I don't know why I wrote down Helen. I meant Linda. Yes.
The way I kind of devised them out was, you're correct. You is more the leader. He's the technical kind of guy on the team. And Linda is more of an emotional leader, kind of the heart of the team. That's kind of how, when I was putting it together. And as you said, as the story goes on, Linda kind of steps up a little more than he does. And I think that's because when they get to the rescue diver, or when they get to the scientist, or when they're trying to rescue them, it takes a little bit more, it's more of a compassion mission rather than a straightforward rescue mission. The technical side of stuff takes a back seat, and they have to get it humanizes the conflict a little more, which is probably why she comes forward as having more of a leadership role.
Yeah, actually I hadn't thought of it that way, and that's a great point. And it's very organic. It's the natural progression where it's the Mike Tyson quote: everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so once things are not going according to plan, then the person that usually is best suited for the situation, whether they want it to or not, they're going to act instinctively. So yeah, that definitely comes across.
Yeah, very quickly, metaphorically speaking, this team gets punched in the mouth from as the mission begins, which it really, the pace of the story, especially part one, move quickly because things don't go exactly as they want it to.
Oh yeah, the story definitely, flies, as you said, especially in part one, which just we barely get any time to spend with the characters doing what they're quote unquote supposed to do before it takes a hard left turn from jump, and it just goes south from there. So Linda, not Helen. I don't know why I wrote that in the show notes. I apologize. Linda.
You got me concerned. I thought, did I write Linda for half the story? And then
No.
No. That's me. I apologize.
I do from time to time.
It's been a long, hard week for me. Linda. So I find that she's the most level-headed one, especially in light of the circumstances that they're in. And I know that, as you say, she's the emotional heart of the team, but I find when I'm reading the story that she is taking everything. I don't want to say she's taking everything in stride, because she's obviously very concerned about what's going on. But again, without getting into spoilers too much, there's this notion that she's like, okay, this is all bat guano crazy, but let's just focus on the end goal and not get swept up in everything else. I don't know how much of the characters' backstories you had written, prior to what we see on the page, obviously, but was there something in her backstory that led her to have this personality?
The short answer is no. I didn't do a whole lot of backstory with these characters. In fact, I had a lot of fun when we had to come up with some extra pages, some back matter for the book. I threw in some team dossiers where I actually had to write a little bit about the characters. So I did things out of order. I came up with some backstory, or at least some of their personality traits. Writing them down, putting them actually on the page after the fact, after the story was complete, was done and completed. I was juggling a lot of stuff in crafting the story. Each element of the story is strong or enough to push it forward. I got a heavy setting with Antarctica. I have there's a lot of plot going on, especially in part 2, and so balancing that with strong characters was a lot of work. And I didn't want to get too muddled into a backstory because I was afraid that if I crafted a backstory for them, I was going to start having that bleed through on the page, and there just wasn't enough space to give everything its due. The plot, the setting, and the backstory of the characters. So instead, I used a lot of the plot developments to show their character and show their actions and show how they move. So that's probably why we don't hear a lot about the character's childhood or their marital status and stuff. It's just the story's moving so fast that there just wasn't enough time for all that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because that actually describes just about any original interaction. How do you break the ice? No pun intended. Actually, pun intended. Go ahead. But just the idea that even in intense situations, especially a rescue mission, like you're not going to know everybody's full history. As a matter of fact, is that even relevant based on what you're doing? And then you want to make sure you get whatever needs to get done, and heaven forbid, if you do have something in common, great. If not, whatever, let's keep moving. So yeah, circumstances like that definitely comes through. I know Anthony didn't put this in the notes ahead of time, but I do have to ask one character specifically, Javier. He is just so intense. I mean, I know even in the story it kind of gives hints as to why it happens or how it happens, but we don't get everything. But yeah, what was your reasoning behind just, I mean, this guy seemed like he had like 20 cups of coffee and just was full speed ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
So Javier is one of the scientists, and we meet him in part 2. And my reasoning behind his character was that the nature of the situation was wearing on him. He was losing his mind a little bit. I play around a lot with the fact of whether or not there's a supernatural element behind it that's playing with him, or whether it's natural, or whether or not it's ego and it's personality that's driving it. So we're not nailing down a strict source for why he's acting the way he does. It's probably a cocktail, an amalgamation of all of them. But I definitely wanted to heighten it to the point where it's not normal behavior at all. So that was definitely done on purpose.
All right, and like I said, it very much is clear that when we're introduced to him, he has seen some things, and he has experienced a lot. And so how much, getting back to the notion of, I guess, world building and backstory, how much did you have planned out as to what happened to him to get him to that point?
Actually, them a little bit, the scientists a little bit more than the divers. I wanted, because the plot was heavily reliant on their actions and what they were doing. So we meet 2 scientists. We meet Javier, and Wanda is the second one. When I was crafting them, I actually wanted them to be a couple. I wanted them to be husband and wife, but I never really divulged that in the story itself. So you can read it either way. They could either be a couple, or they can either be strangers or friends. It's not really specified, and it's not really important to the story. But that's the way I pictured them. And when I was writing their dialogue, I had that in mind. Whether or not you get it or don't get it, it doesn't really matter. But it definitely helped with me kind of formulating how this situation came about.
All right. Yeah. And so the other thing is the ending very much leaves things open for more story. And obviously there's, a sequel hook there. Again, without too much spoilers. How much of that do you have mapped out for, a Polar Paradox Part 3, or maybe, the continuation of the story?
So funny. The ending is I grown up on like Are You Afraid of the Dark, the Nickelodeon show. I love the show, and a lot of my readers, they hate that I have these endings so much that they're open. Like a lot of those Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, they kind of end on that note where it's just, oh, what if? So there is an epilogue in the story. In the original version of the script, there was no epilogue. It just ended on a page before it, which was a huge cliffhanger to begin with. And I was talking with Antonio, and I wasn't happy with that note. I kind of wanted to give that Are You Afraid of the Dark episode ending where people were just like, what the hell is going on? And it never sat right with me. So I included a little epilogue that would be a teaser, as you said, for a follow-up. And I broached the subject with him, and I said, look, I got this little teaser in here. What do you think about doing a sequel? And because we only wanted to do a two-parter. And he said, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Let's see how the Kickstarter for the first one does. And it did very well. We were happy with the response. Everybody loved the book. So I was able to convince him to carry it on for a sequel for another part 2, which we're working on now. The story is completely mapped out. I scripted the first issue. He sent me some art today. So it's well on its way. And I actually have a milestone goal for this Kickstarter that as soon as I hit 100 backers, I'm going to reveal the title for part 2. So I'm kind of excited for that. And yeah, there definitely will be a Polar Paradox sequel.
Excellent. So now you mentioned about Antonio. You said you met him at a convention.
Yes.
Which con? Just curious.
I'm in New York, so it was a local con here called Hudson Valley Comic Con.
Okay. All right. Very cool.
Small convention.
I definitely enjoyed the artwork. The one, especially in part 2, there's a sequence. It's basically like a 2-page splash where they're working their way through the tunnels. Again, I'm trying not to give too much spoilers, but I thoroughly enjoyed the full use of the medium there with, it's this big page where they're just winding their way through this like worm-like tunnel with these little inserts of the dialogue and these little things. But I just really appreciated the structure and the layout of the artwork there. And I thought it really contributed to the story. I know, obviously, you as the writer, how much of that was your suggestion? How much of that was Antonio saying, this is how I think this should be mapped out?
So the overall structure of how I wanted it to look was my idea. I'm a terrible artist. Like not even close to remotely good. I'm surprised when I see writers do a quick sketch and it's like some figure that looks like remotely what it's supposed to look like. I'm do stick figures. That's it. So when I wrote the actual in the script how I wanted this to look, he was like, yeah, you're going to need to give me some sort of blueprint for how you want this to look, because I don't get it. So I actually did it. I drew some tunnels. I put some insets in there and I sent it to him and he said, got it. I know exactly what you want. And he came back with what's in the final book. And I was blown away that he pulled it off the way he did. The only thing I was worried about was I handled the lettering. So that scene is a traditional lettering. You're reading it as they go through the tunnels. It's not strictly left to right. You're reading left to right and then back to left again. So I sent it, I lettered it, and I sent it off to a couple people I trust. And I said, does this make sense? And they said, yeah, it makes sense. So I was glad that I was able to pull off the lettering and people were able to follow along with the dialogue.
Yeah, the layout reminded me, the artwork is very different, but the layout reminded me of some early Sienkiewicz stuff, which is the way he was playing with the panels and the medium itself. Bill Sienkiewicz, I'm a huge Moon Knight fan, and Bill Sienkiewicz obviously very instrumental in creating that character. And so a lot of the early Moon Knight books, he really played with the medium, because there's things obviously you can do in a comic book that you can't do in live action or in any other storytelling format. So I really enjoy when artists fully take advantage of it. And it's not just talking heads or whatever. It's okay, we're painting the picture and you get, a sense of movement and through line in there. So that was really interesting. And I definitely appreciated that.
That goes back to the what I was talking about earlier, the challenge of storytelling, pushing the envelope, doing something different, stepping outside the box. And that's why I like comics. I do that with prose a lot too. I try to play around with stuff, get it a little meta with either fonts or page layouts or this or that. It's harder with novel. With comics, you have a lot of tools in your toolbox to play around with. So that's why I love the medium, because it's a real challenge and you're able to do things like that. Experiment.
Well, yeah, because you have the visual aspect as opposed to the words, nothing against, it's not a knock on prose. It's just the words are there. So you, as you say, you are kind of limited in what you can do there. But certainly with an artistic medium like comic books, you have that additional dimension to the storytelling. And I really appreciate when creators take full advantage of that. And that's very obviously been done here. So after this, what are you working on next?
I'm planning 5 Kickstarters this year. This will be my 3rd. After this, my next one is in August. It's for a horror book called Pipe Creepers, which it's a horror book, but it's supposed to be like a fun adventure horror book, So the way I described it, it's like Super Mario versus Cthulhu, because the premise of the book is plumbers go to a creepy mansion and they go into the basement to start working and they get sucked into like a Lovecraftian scenario. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
So like the Super Mario Brothers movie then.
A little bit. So these 2 plumbers, and I got one's obviously you could tell is the Mario and the other's the Luigi, the fun guy. So I did that because in my day job, I was a chimney sweeper. So I spent a lot of time in basements, creepy basements filled with stuff. And I wanted to take that experience and do a story with it, with my love of Lovecraft, my love of horror. So combining those two, really, I was able to do a nice, fun, another 2-parter.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely fans of Super Mario here.
And I'm a fan of Lovecraft. So yeah.
I say that as the hook. I mean, the guy doesn't use a flower to shoot fireballs or anything, but just the plumbers going on an adventure is where I'm trying to grab people.
No, definitely. I appreciate the summary, the elevator pitch, if you will, for that book. That's interesting. And then you said, so that's the next one. And then what's the other one you're working on, or are you not ready to announce that one yet?
No, my next one I'm hoping for November, which is a book I'm calling Grim Space. And the basic premise of it is reimagining fairy tales in space, basically taking stuff like Little Red Riding Hood, 3 Little Pigs, and turning them into like a Star Wars type setting with spaceships and aliens and robots and stuff like that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because so many of the Grimm's fairy tales, people look at them superficially and it's like, have you actually read those original stories? Those are pretty freaking heavy. They weren't meant to all be for kids.
Yeah, they definitely get dark in there. We got Disney to thank for that, for grabbing them all and making them cartoons. But yeah, they end in a lot of death and misery. So, but they're definitely, I would say the tone for that is definitely Star Wars oriented. It's not all ages for kids, but kids will definitely enjoy it. I'm doing like a one-shot, which is kind of a pilot for a larger series, a larger universe. And the story that I'm basing off is Jack and the Beanstalk. So it has to do with Jack is a mechanic on a ship, and he gets sucked into an adventure going to a giant alien ship, and it's a lot of fun.
Is this all creator owned or?
Yes, this is all creator owned stuff.
Excellent. Very cool. Well, we'll be sure to mention those Kickstarters, and obviously, send us the links, and we will, we'll promote them. Just give you one last opportunity to plug the Kickstarter. What are some of the rewards you've got for people who back the book?
I have obviously the book. I have a digital too. If you haven't read part 1, that's going to be available. I have a variant cover for part 1 and part 2 if you like that. I'm also having a deluxe edition, which is essentially parts 1 and 2 combined in a single wraparound cover. So that's going to be cool too. I always offer commissions as part of my rewards. So you could get a a sketch cover commission from Antonio. I also do a writing commission because I'm jealous of artists that they get to do that. So I always put that up there. I usually get 1 or 2 people a campaign that kind of commissioned me to write them a 1,000-word short story, which is always a lot of fun. And I have a Polar Paradox theme song too that I include in some of the rewards. So I have a buddy of mine that I commission every comic that I do to do a little theme song, and he's phenomenal. So those are always a little fun thing to throw in there.
Nice. I like when writers and creators come up with some out of the box ideas and rewards for Kickstarters and things of that nature. And theme songs in comics, I think, are need to be much more prevalent than they are. I know Next Wave had one, and there's a handful of other comics that I can think of off the top of my head where music was a big part of it. But I appreciate that, there's a musical element to it. And Doc as well. We're both very big music fans, in addition to comics and Star Wars and video games and all the nerd things. Is what we're all about. So Frank, where can folks find you on social media and the internets?
Pretty simple. You can remember me as Frank the Writer. So I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Frank the Writer. Also, frankthewriter.com is my website, and you can sign up for my mailing list there, which is kind of the best way to keep track of my goings on.
Excellent. So the Kickstarter for Polar Paradox Part 2 will be live if you're listening to this, it will be live, and we will have links to it in the show notes. Frank Martin, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate this, and sincerely best of luck to you on the Kickstarter.
No, thank you so much, guys, for having me. It's guys like yourself to take the time out and talk to me that make this all worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm just wondering now, I just realized with the title of Polar Paradox, and not to give away a lot of things, I wonder if any of these characters suffered from bipolar disorder.
Very interesting. I don't know. Maybe.
Doc loves to end these things on a pun. That's his thing.
Fine. It's fine. It's funny. I've done especially for part 1, tons of interviews. It was just, you could see how easily that the ice and the water and the freezing puns, it's just a world of hurt there. So I'm more than okay with it.
Excellent. Frank, again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.